Hei, velkommen tilbake til Infinigate TV her fra Blackhat 2016. Jeg er her sammen med vår venn Chester fra Sophos. Welcome, Chester.
Thanks for having me back.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, the weather's a little different than when I was in Norway in February to Las Vegas in August.
Yes.
Things are a little different this time.
But it's a convention again, and a little bigger security event this time. Blackhat, and you had a chance to catch some briefings yet?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a week-long hacker event, which by the end of the week it'll be very hard to pay attention. So at the beginning of the week, we try to attend some briefings, and the week started yesterday with the Security B-Sides event here in Las Vegas, and saw a really interesting talk actually by a government bureaucrat, and you don't find it very often that you say you find something interesting from a government bureaucrat, but it was kind of about how we need to modernize how we think of passwords.
Okay, so meaning that we have to change passwords more often, use more special characters, what?
Well, a bit of a combination of what you would expect, like we should really increase the minimums, and so for example, advice at least the government used to give government departments was that 8 characters was a minimum. They're now saying, well, you really got to be at minimum of, say, 12 characters, not 8 anymore. So yeah, the things you would expect about increasing the complexity, but also getting rid of things that make users try to subvert our policies and actually end up weakening our security, right? So many of us have things where we say, oh, you must have a small letter, a capital letter, a number, a symbol. When you do that, it makes it very difficult for users. And if you actually study how passwords are broken, it turns out that they're having longer pass phrases, period, even if they're all just letters or even if they're all just numbers. The length itself is what truly makes it more secure. So let's stop making things harder on users than they should be. And I think the other surprising one for a lot of organizations is eliminating password expiration. And I've been saying this for a few years myself. But the truth of the matter is, if you've chosen a good password and you don't think your database has been stolen, then there's really no good reason to change it. You should change it when you believe that many of your users have fallen victim to a phishing attack. Then you should make them change it. If your domain controller is compromised, you should make everyone change it.
Definitely.
But if not, let users pick one really good long one like you've asked them to.
Yeah.
And then let them keep it for years so that they're not burdened with constantly having to memorize something so difficult.
I think that sounds that would resonate nicely with at least the users. You do get a lot of users complaining that this password again, and then you, of course, like you said, then you risk just having a perfectly good password and substituting it with a inferior password.
Yeah, well, adding a 1 onto the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then you must change it. I'll change it to a 2.
All right, and 2, and then 3, and
and so we're artificially not increasing our security at all when we do that. So let's just stop doing that, right? And some other things around other assistive things to help people with convenience, like using the fingerprint sensors on your iPhones and your Androids, right? Is it a perfect technology? No, but it's better than 1, 2, 3, 4, which is what many people will do if they have to put a pin in every time.
Yeah.
So, my colleagues and I were talking how we're all willing to have actual long, strong passwords on our phones now that they have fingerprint sensors, because I only need to enter it once every 3 or 4 days. And so if I only have to enter it every 3 or 4 days, I'm willing to have a longer one. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the time I can quickly get access to my content. Yeah. So I like the idea of us rethinking things that, we've been talking the same about passwords since the 90s. And it is time to rethink it, because what we've been doing clearly has got some problems.
And we were talking earlier, you were also mentioning in terms of traditional authentication methods, it's something new as two-factor authentication using text.
Yeah, text message SMS authentication, at least for the U.S. government now, in this new standard, will be prohibited. It's not considered
for governmental
secure.
use. Yeah.
For governmental use. But I'm finding these standards to be, I think, for once, the government setting a great standard that we can all learn from these standards, because the problem with SMS, there's several problems with it, and I think we hear about the hacker drama on TV of SS7, the signaling system that the phone companies use, can be hacked, and we can intercept your text messages. Yeah, that's possible, but that's not really what happens in the real world. What happens in the real world is every single mobile telecommunications provider that can sell you a handset at every shopping center in the world can move your number to somebody else's phone, and there's no authentication at all. And so I go to the store and I impersonate Jane, and I say, I'm Jane Smith, and I just bought a new phone. Can you please transfer my number? And the person I'm talking to knows nothing about security, doesn't even work for the phone company, just works for a mobile handset seller at this mall, and goes, sure, and they move your phone number, and now I get your text messages. So there's no way to really be sure who's got that number as a part of that authentication process. So we really need to be working toward things where you have proof of identity, and whether that's out of band things like even these software tokens that like Google Authenticator that many people have on their mobile phones.
And if you combine it with biometrics like fingerprint, it's getting pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Like if and I see Apple moving that direction a lot now with iOS, where they're going, oh look, you can now authenticate to your Mac to buy stuff in the App Store with the fingerprint reader on your mobile phone. So you've got two different things and maybe a PIN code. So you got something something you have, and it's not on the device that maybe is infected with malware. I mean, that's a good approach, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more of companies trying to embrace this, and I think there'll be a lot of competition for companies to sort of be that identity provider that provides that. And whether it's going to be Facebook and Google and Apple, for a while they're all going to be fighting over who's going to kind of do the best job of it, but in the end I think we'll win with better security.
And when we talk about security, this is like the standard, we have to talk about IoT, Internet of Things.
Yeah, and I think last time
anything new here this year in that sort of area?
Well, there's a lot of talks upcoming. I did go to a talk earlier in the day today that was interesting, talking about the lack of security in the Bluetooth protocol that's implemented in many of these devices. And it's a particularly challenging problem when you think about, say it's a smart doorbell, something like that you don't want to put batteries in it more than once a year, because you want the battery to last forever, because people hate doing that kind of stuff. You don't want to have to change the batteries every 2 months, that kind of thing. So you communicate with it over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, but you don't want it to anything to be using up the battery. And encryption, of course, is CPU intensive. It uses battery more quickly, and there's all these complexities, right? Or maybe it's because the device is so small, right? You've got a Fitbit in your pocket, and you want the battery to last a week.
Yeah.
And so we keep cutting corners on the security to make it easy to use, have long battery life, and all these things. So this researcher from Poland showed he built a Bluetooth proxy that allows you to man-in-the-middle Bluetooth technology to just see if it's properly secured or not, and then to see if it's not, what types of things you might be able to manipulate these devices into doing. So he was showing how he man-in-the-middle the door lock for a car. So he was able to tell the car to unlock and lock its doors without the proper app, or just by man-in-the-middle the traffic once when a legitimate person had their smartphone near their car, and then he was able to then control the locks. He was showing smart doorknobs and how he could, again, trick the app into thinking that you locked your door when you didn't. And then, of course, you don't need to unlock it. It's never locked it. But this type of thing. But it was very interesting research, because he went into some of the technical details of implementation of Bluetooth and talked about how the standard actually has things in it for Bluetooth LE, the low energy version that we're using in all these IoT devices. But the manufacturers don't seem to either know it, or they're not bothering to use any of it. Like there's things built into the protocol.
It takes time. It takes resources from the actual hardware, and it's that. I'm not sure if that was touched upon. Did you see the opening keynote?
No, I wasn't able to attend the keynote this morning.
It was something in
Stan Minsky, I believe.
Yeah, and he was also talking about the security perspective from when you start building the software that's being used. I mean, just to have the security perspective the whole way, coding securely, and of course it's.
Well, it's obviously the best way.
Sounds easier than it is, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. I mean, I think we need to be practical. The truth is, 80% of the things we're going to use in the next year have already been developed. So whether we should have or we shouldn't have, it's irrelevant because we already got it.
Yeah.
So we do need to get better as well at adding it in, sadly. Like, you're right. I mean, Dan's right. I mean, if you can build with security in mind, you always end up with a better product. But that's kind of the disappointment, I think, with these Bluetooth devices, in that the protocol, the standards committee who came up with the Bluetooth low energy standard, understood that this was a hard problem and that manufacturers wouldn't want to do it. So they built it into the standard so they didn't have to do it. And now, even though it's there, they're not using it anyway.
Yeah.
Like, all they have to do is turn it to on. It's not a complicated problem. It's simply a matter of acknowledging it. But the good news, I think, is that we're certainly hearing a lot more talk. And another talk actually I went to related to this was about from a group called I Am the Cavalry, which Josh Corman helped create a year or two ago. And their job is trying to work with regulators to impose some regulation on these companies producing these products that's reasonable to secure them, but starting with the most scary insecure things: medical devices, cars, these types of things. And there's been incredible cooperation in the last 12 months since last year's Blackhat between security researchers and government regulators and the industry, right? So you get the medical device manufacturers at the same table as some really smart security researchers and their government overseers, and together come up with a practical way to move us forward with having more secure medical and more secure. And I think it starts with those critical things like cars and medical devices. And once they've got it down, we have a model that we can then take to the light bulb company and the fitness company.
That doesn't really, it's not like
it's less important.
Yeah, right. And we did see, at least we, from our perspective, been seeing like this sort of maybe a shift towards now it's all about endpoints again. Endpoint security is big again, and I saw that Sophos, traditional endpoint company, and one of your videos, like the endpoint and the firewall are fighting, two guys fighting, right?
Yeah.
So you've done something now that actually combines those two in synchronized security. Just give me the elevator pitch real quick.
Well, yeah, I'll give you that, and I'll talk a little bit on the endpoint side, since there's so much talk about it, as you say, here at Blackhat. In fact, my colleague John and I, at another conference this year at RSA, we actually dressed up as the endpoint and firewall guys like we have in the video at the show, and then we would go back and forth, and we did some we had some fun with it, wearing our endpoint and firewall t-shirts. But I mean, clearly endpoint security alone, well, to be honest, we're getting to a point where any of the technologies we're using in our layered defenses by themselves are not enough to protect us, right? And it's the reason we built the layers. And we've got web filters, we've got email filters, we've got firewalls, we've got endpoint. But the problem is now they're kind of isolated islands of information, right? Everything on an endpoint is a file. And we have to decide, just by the fact that it's a file, is it a good one or a bad one? And try to stop the bad ones for you, right? But we can't be wrong. Because if we're wrong, you probably won't buy our products ever again. So we've got to be really careful to not say that a good file is bad. And that's traditional antivirus, right? And part of the reason that efficacy of traditional antivirus has been reduced over the years is the bad guys have gotten really good at being a light enough shade of gray that we're afraid to call it bad.
Yeah.
Because it's just like close enough to a good file that, gosh, we can't make that mistake or we may lose you as a customer, we lose your trust. So our first step in trying to remedy that in our products is, well, we need to get more information about these files, right? And in all directions. So now we've got our firewall talking to our endpoint. We started doing that last October. The next release is coming at the probably around this October, to be honest. We're in the middle of our beta process right now. We've got distributors and partners testing that. I'm testing it on my home network, and we've got a lot of testers working on it at this point. And refining what we've learned over the last year of having those two things talking together. But it allows us to do some really neat things about finding bad stuff, right? That file that was gray that antivirus didn't stop, now when it triggers and it's actually bad and we don't know yet on the endpoint, if the firewall sees the traffic going somewhere that we know is dangerous or malicious, the firewall can call back to the endpoint, talk to it, and say, hey, what's generating traffic right now to this IP address? And the endpoint goes, oh, it's process ID 1234. Firewall goes, well, it's sending stuff to a criminal control center.
Yeah.
Kill process 1234. Where did process 1234 come from? Oh, it came from this exe that was downloaded in Outlook. Okay, delete that too, right? Because that's the source of the infection. And if it's enabled, send it back to Sophos Lab so we can stop that file next time before it ever talks.
Right.
And so that's kind of increasing this feedback loop.
And you can
between the
also
products.
cut it off the network. Isolate.
Yeah,
that,
isolate.
actually.
Don't let it talk anymore.
Yeah. So you're just in shutdown mode until you remediate whatever.
Right. And 2 weeks ago, we launched our new encryption product that ties into that as well. So now, if a workstation is compromised, and we know it's compromised, but we can't clean it up, right? So we know there's malware on there, but it's new, and we don't know what the mechanisms are to get rid of it yet. We can revoke the encryption key so it can't steal any data from that compromised workstation. So the network stops it from communicating, so it can't communicate with your file server to steal your files. And then we take the encryption keys off of it temporarily as well, so that any sensitive data that's on it can't be accessed by the malware until you've had a chance to clean it up. So that's kind of step 2 in our progression. And then I think step 3 is what we're hearing about so much here at Blackhat this year about endpoint, which is next generation endpoint. And a lot of people saying, do I need traditional AV? Do I need next generation AV? What do I need? And I say yes. The answer is yes, because next generation antivirus is really about exploit detection. But not all malware uses an exploit.
Nope.
So traditional antivirus is great at finding the static files, the Trojans, all the things that aren't exploitative, which next generation antivirus has more of a challenge with. And yet the next generation antivirus component is great at finding that 0-day stuff and finding that flash exploitation and that type of thing. So we'll be offering both starting in a couple months, and our initial testing of using our traditional antivirus with our next generation together has been incredibly successful. So we're really looking forward to bringing that to market.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to getting some use cases and some real live intel on the endpoint firewall collaboration thing, and especially with the the ongoing ransomware rampage, at least in the Nordics and I guess worldwide.
Yeah,
really.
it's everywhere.
It's and if it's locky or still crypto walls running around still, and just you can minimize a lot of damage just by getting the machine offline.
Yeah. Yeah, and with our next generation AV that's coming out also has a feature called CryptoGuard. And so anytime we see something trying to go through a bunch of files on your hard drive, we make backups. And then if we notice that it looks like it's actually encrypting and trying to hold those files ransom, we stop the process, kill the process, and then we put all the files back. And that way you don't lose anything, and you're good as new. So we've got solutions for that coming out soon, and that's pretty good stuff because ransomware is pretty dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. And but if you have it, it's so all right. You did a good job stopping it. So where did it come from? That's also something that we're seeing a lot of interest in, especially from the reseller segment or the MSSPs who want to know who want to be able to tell their customer that, because they know they have ransomware,
right?
Yeah, the forensics part. Where did this come from? What happened?
Yeah, and that's going to be part of this launch as well. I mean, us nerds call it root cause analysis. What was the root cause of this ransomware getting into our system? But I think most of us think about it more as a forensic investigation, right?
And just
was that an
answer the
email
question
attachment?
What the hell happened?
Yeah,
That kind of answer to that question. So.
Yeah, and we're tracking all that on the endpoint now, which is really quite neat. So basically, the antivirus, since we're we're intercepting every read and write to your hard drive to check it to see if it's malware anyway. We're logging all those interactions, so we can go back and unwind when something like ransomware happens. We can say, okay, CryptoGuard detected this file behaving as ransomware, and then we can unwind which process created that file, which process created that, and which DLL was injected into memory when that happened, and we can unwind all that and go, oh, it was the Flash plugin in Internet Explorer when you visited www.badguy.root. And then we can give you all the pieces necessary to start recognizing where you may have a weakness in your defenses, because if it keeps coming in through Flash, then you may want to consider how you can limit Flash in your environment. If it keeps coming from
turn on your
a certain web browser, maybe you want to use a different web browser. But today it's really hard to learn the sources of infection, and I think that'll be one of the most popular features in the product when it launches. I've been playing with it the last few months in the lab, and I just love the fact that I have like this beautiful graph on my screen that shows all the things tied back to the source, and it's sort of a dream because I could get all that information before. It just took me 2 days of forensic analysis by hand. And I literally would have a sheet of paper and I'd be like, all right, this DLL, and then, oh crap, it was NTDLL, and that's tied into everything. And how do I figure out which thing, actually caused it? And by hand you can do it. But now we're going to be able to have it built into a tool so people that don't have a forensic expert on their staff can have that ability.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for your time, Chester. Pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me again. I guess it's my turn to come to Europe again for next one.
Yeah, and well, the weather might be a little different, but it'll still be good. Det var alt herfra. Takk for nå.